Hello and welcome to episode number 370 of the Armen Show podcast. I'm your host, Armen Shermer. This is a special one. I like in-person discussion, learning, an individual I've known of for many years. I want to welcome you to this one with my guest today, Dr. Michael Shermer. Doctor, welcome to the show.
Hey, nice to see you again. Or for the first time.
For the first time in person. But when you connect with somebody, it's like you've known them for a long time.
Right. Well, through books, I mean, in a way, you're connecting to somebody's mind when you read their book, even if they're dead, right? You can talk to Shakespeare, as it were, or Homer.
We're always connected there.
Yeah.
I talked about that before, how we're always connected to philosophers from the past if we link to their ideas.
Right. You read David Hume, and it's like, oh my God, I'm talking to one of the great Enlightenment philosophers of all time, and he's dead.
He's long gone.
So you can talk to the dead.
And he represents Scotland well.
Yeah, indeed.
I like him and Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius and other ones as well.
Right.
Let me give a little background here for the individuals that don't know. One, I know of Michael from the past, where I once did a text interview with you on the Moral Arc and Skeptic, maybe 5-6 years ago. And that meant a lot to me because it was covering two books at once. And the level of detail I liked of the Moral Arc was a lot. So I enjoyed that book. I want to bring that up. You are the founding publisher of Skeptic magazine, which there are some right there in front of us. The host of the Michael Shermer Show. We both have our show with our name on it, which is a cool thing. Presidential Fellow at Chapman University, where you teach Skepticism 101. You were a monthly columnist at Scientific American for 18 years, which is super duper. Now you write a weekly Substack column. All the intelligent material I see on Substack is wonderful. And author of many books, including what I mentioned, The Moral Arc, The Believing Brain, Skeptic, your new book, Conspiracy, and Heaven on Earth, and more. This is a wonderful thing. What has brought you into the category of skepticism in full in the first place? Because this is a theme across much of what you've done. You also have Skeptics Society with many members.
Yeah, good. Okay, big, broad question. I was always interested in these topics, the kind of fringes of science, the paranormal, the supernatural, cults, conspiracy theories, ever since I was in college, which was 50 years ago that I matriculated this month, September of 2022. And so I thought there might be something to it because it seemed like a lot of really smart people believed a lot of these things. And you know, when I went to graduate school and training in experimental psych, I learned the methods of science and statistics and research methods. And it seemed like a lot of the research on the paranormal and supernatural was not very rigorous. And there were people who attempted it, but it seemed like their research was not as rigorous as what professional scientists were doing. And then around the time I was in graduate school, there was a kind of a nascent skeptical movement that was started. With what is now called Skeptical Inquirer magazine, and at the time it was called Psych Up, but Center for Inquiry is what it's called now. But these are people like James Randi and Martin Gardner, Paul Kurtz, Ray Hyman, and others who really wanted to investigate the claims that people were being made, particularly people like Uri Geller, who was hugely famous. I mean, he was like the cover of Time magazine, or maybe it was Newsweek. I mean, he was on all the talk shows. I mean, he was huge, bending spoons with his mind. And of course, these magicians like Randy, like he's doing it the hard way. There's magic tricks of how to bend spoons, right? And so I thought, right. So, and scientists could not figure out how this was done, and they remained baffled. So it was clear to me that there was a market for, a need for a skeptical movement, which was undergoing. I mean, like skeptical magazines, conferences, methods, tools. What are the kind of, what's in the toolkit of the skeptic who wants to investigate a claim? And it turns out it's different than science and philosophy. I mean, there's a kind of a specific set of tools that we use to apply to claims, extraordinary claims, like Sagan's famous extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, the ECRI principle. And, that's kind of a tool you would apply to anything, but particularly to claims that people in these realms make and that skeptics can investigate. So this just became, over the course of many years, my full-time job, as it were. Publishing the magazine, running the nonprofit science education, Skeptics Society, and I'm still a professor at Chapman, but my main job is here. This is it. We just moved into the office, as you can see in the background. Just kind of getting the message out to the public, to everybody, that there are ways to think and reason about any kind of claim you hear. It could be from the paranormal, like ESP and psychics and astrologers, to cults, to conspiracy theories like the 2020 election was rigged. How should we think about those claims? How do you know it wasn't rigged? How do you know it was rigged? What kind of questions should you ask people? So that's what I'm interested in. Everything.
It's a cool category and very important. I would say it's more important, in my mind, it's more important now than it was even 10 years ago, as things shift away from looking at the detail of what's going on and actually challenging it or questioning it as a person. What kinds of qualities lend themselves to becoming skeptical versus letting things go and never questioning what's in your world?
Well, most people do that. They don't bother to ask.
Right.
But when it comes down to something important, like, again, was the 2020 election fraudulent? That's a hugely important question, because if it is, we have a serious problem. And if it isn't, then why is it that half the other party, the Republican Party, thinks it was? Whoa. Okay, so now we're talking about, people are marching on the Capitol to overthrow the government. That's about as serious as you can get. It's the kind of thing you can't really ignore or treat as entertainment, like whether somebody reads their astrology column or not. It's not a big deal, right? Very few people are making life decisions based on astrology. Hopefully not political leaders or CEOs of major corporations. So that's relatively harmless. But as you ratchet up to more serious things, or take quack medicine, another one of our areas, people are diagnosed with cancer. Maybe they take the traditional treatments. Maybe they don't. Maybe they go off to some foreign country to try some kind of weird alternative, so-called alternative treatments. Well, it would help to know if they work or not, right? Because if they don't, then you should know that. So the underlying principle here is the truth matters. We want to know what's true. Not what I want to be true, because everybody does that, but what's actually true. And how do you know?
Now, by the way, the subtitle of your book is Why the Rational Believe the Irrational. Are the irrational, can they be a guiding force for the rational folks, or should the rational be guiding, who should be guiding the others, if we would think about it? So
the subtitle is really after this hard question of why is it that smart people believe weird things, which is, this was my first book here, why people believe weird things. So the hard question is why smart people believe weird things. And the answer is because they're better at rationalizing beliefs they arrived at for non-smart reasons. So this would apply to a lot of conspiracy theories. Now, some conspiracy theories turn out to be true. There are conspiracies. But here we're talking about the kind of really weird ones like QAnon, Pizzagate, the claim that Hillary and other Democrats are in charge of this secret satanic pedophile cult that's being run out of a pizzeria in Washington, D.C. Now, is it possible that anyone can really believe this? Right? One guy did, Edgar Welch. He went there with his gun to break up the pedophile ring, which is what you would do if you really believed it and the police weren't doing anything about this. I'm going down there. He left a note for his daughters. I'm going in. This is what I would do for you if I thought you were being, trafficked. So, but most people don't. So what's really going on there is, that conspiracy is a proxy for something else. That we don't trust the left. The libtards, we're going to own them. Hillary's evil. The Democrats are evil. They're trying to destroy America. Whether that Pizzagate thing is true or not, it's kind of secondary. It's a kind of a proxy for some general thing there. So these are rational people. You've seen the interviews with the people that were inside the Capitol Dome on January 6th. These aren't tinfoil hat wearing weirdos, just completely uneducated, unemployed. No, these are like regular people. Ex-soldiers, lawyers, doctors, business owners, successful people. Left their jobs, left their families to go to overthrow the government. Right? So they're rational, believing an irrational thing. Why? What's the explanation for that? So that's what I'm after in the book.
That's a cool way to look at it at that angle. some of the key events actually. So I look more at the philosophies and personality types that have certain views and what leads them to it psychologically, and then there's the examples of it actually in place. So sticking with the more practical world, what are some of the key examples where conspiracy has taken hold in the past, let's say, decade, that are well known, or at least in the conspiracy world, most well known?
Well, I hit most of the big ones in the book: JFK assassination, 9/11 truth, Obama birtherism, QAnon, as I mentioned, Pizzagate, rigged election conspiracy theory, but also a lot of the older ones that turn out to be true, like MK Ultra, which was the CIA program of mind control. We were concerned about that the Russians, the Chinese, and the North Koreans were ahead of us in psychological and neurophysiological techniques to get people to reveal their secrets, mind control, or create a Manchurian Candidate, as the movie had it, where you could essentially program somebody to robotically, say, assassinate a foreign leader. And believe it or not, I mean, just you go down the rabbit hole of these subjects, the CIA did have programs to assassinate foreign leaders. I mean, this was, completely, I don't know if you'd say it's legal. No one knew they were doing it. I mean, it was all super top secret. Many attempts to assassinate Castro, for example, and other foreign leaders, some successfully. And so, those kinds of things, when you read about them now, decades later, they've come out and you think, So one reason people believe conspiracy theories is because a lot of them are true. Our government, the CIA was doing this? Yeah. What? I mean, did Congress approve this? No, nobody. They didn't even know about it.
Right.
Wow. Okay. Then you hear enough of these things, you think, well, okay, well then what else is going on? Right? So some of the conspiracy theories we hear now sound pretty wacky, but Sandy Hook was a false flag operation, says Alex Jones. Yeah, that's ridiculous and false. But false flag operations do happen. Governments conspire to do things as a pretense to going to war. No, I wouldn't say 9/11. I would definitely say 9/11 was not an inside job in any way. Bush didn't know it was going to happen. He didn't make it happen. But politicians do capitalize on what happens. In this case, that's what the Bush administration did. They used this as a pretense to go to war, not just in Afghanistan, but especially Iraq, for all the reasons we know. Oil, his father didn't finish the job, and on and on. And so in conspiracy circles, they have this debate about MIHOP. Did he make it happen on purpose? Or LIHOP? Did he let it happen on purpose? Well, in my book, I introduced COWHOP, C-O-W, capitalized on what happened on purpose, which politicians do. Like, okay, well, we've wanted to go to war. We don't have a reason. Now we have a reason. Let's do it.
It's a very strategic move of sorts. Take advantage of what is current, apply it adaptively to your thing, and make it look like it was in this direction. We're already going that way. That makes sense.
Yeah, I think about Pearl Harbor. I mean, Roosevelt long wanted to get into the war to support the British. And, Churchill was begging him to get involved because, we could lose. This could be the end of Western democracy, Western civilization in Europe. Had the Nazis succeeded, and Roosevelt's hands were tied by Congress, by treaties, by laws. Okay, we can lend you 50 destroyers, the Lend-Lease program, we can give you some money, this and that, but there's not much I can't send troops, unless we're officially at war. Well, so, Pearl Harbor made that happen. Okay, we're at war, and Hitler declared war on the United States. Boom. Okay, we'll send everything. Right? So it's not like, but he was accused. There were conspiracy theories about Pearl Harbor. Oh, Roosevelt knew it would happen, or he made it happen, LIHOP, MIHOP. But no, he just capitalized on what happened on purpose, COWHOP, right? Okay.
That term is great. It's true. Taking advantage of the moment. One thing that you reminded me of here that you mentioned in the book is conspiracies don't always have a negative undertone. They are sometimes, they have like a pejorative connotation, but they can be actual things that occur, and some of them are actual, and they did occur, and it's just describing a plot or plan of people to do something, so they're not always to be disregarded. And also the idea that you would rather have a false positive than a false negative, because a false negative would mean that the item happened, you weren't prepared for it, and it overtook you, versus a false positive where you prepared maybe, but nothing happened, so you're fine. what is an example or two of a false negative that has taken place where individuals were unprepared for a conspiracy and were overtaken because of that?
Yeah, great question. You just outlined the signal detection problem, right? How do we detect the signal in the noise? There's a lot of noise. So because of the problem of patternicity, where we tend to find meaningful patterns in random noise, you got to be really careful. You got to have a high bar set that that's a true conspiracy that the theory is recognizing. So that's hard to do, but one of the arguments I made that you just articulated was that we're more likely to make type 1 errors, false positives, than type 2 errors, false negatives. Better to assume the bad thing is real when it turns out it's not, no harm, versus missing the bad thing. There's a coalition against you and they're out to get you and you don't recognize it. Then that can take you out of the gene pool or take you or whatever. It's an evolutionary argument, right? So now there's no perfect algorithm for this, for any signal detection problem. It depends on the particular case you're studying, right? So where does the preponderance of evidence lead to, one conclusion or the other? And, so I have my conspiracy detection kit in the book. You have to ask certain questions about it. Like, how many people would have to be involved to pull this off? The more people, less likely it is to be true. People are incompetent. They make mistakes. They can't keep their mouth shut. We hear about it later. Like most of the, big conspiracies by governments, we find out about them because of leaks of like WikiLeaks, for example, is an example. We find out what our government was doing, and whistleblowers. In a way, we have whistleblower laws because the government realized, well, we better protect these people because we really need to know what's going on, corporations or government agencies. So that's kind of a way at it. Like, let's try to determine which are true, which are false. So, with conspiracies, again, it's not like perpetual motion machines. It can't be true. They would violate the second law of thermodynamics. All of physics would be out the window, say, if ESP was real. It's not. Can't be. But conspiracies do happen. These are real, right? And a lot of them. So enough that we pays to be a little paranoid, right? Just make more type 1 errors, false positives. Like, I thought that one was real. It's not. But hey, at least I didn't get taken up and get screwed over at work or, by whoever, And, and again, people do conspire. I mean, a lot of corporations and government agencies are not transparent. So it's not clear why some people get raises and others don't, why some people climb the company ladder faster than others. And people that don't feel like there's something maybe going on here. Why am I not getting the raise? How come that guy got, elevated faster than me? And sometimes there's reasons for that, cabals and conspiracies. They really do happen.
That's true. There are things underneath that are not described always in detail, and having an idea about that is not always so bad. Maybe you're trying to figure out the reasoning that will never be publicly described because that would be disadvantageous to that crew. Interesting. Now, one thing you mentioned earlier was patternicity, and I like how in the book you listed many times 10 or 7 or 10 or more items representing a description of something related to conspiratorial conduct. So one was qualities that I believe make a conspiracy less likely to occur or more likely. Patternicity, agenticity, and that category.
Oh, just, here I'm looking at criteria for what would make a conspiracy theory true or false, right? And these are kind of more probabilities, like the more likely it is to be a random pattern that's not really there, the less likely the conspiracy theory is true. Like the more people have to be involved, or the more elements that have to come together. And again, the brain is wired to see patterns that aren't there, to find agents, hidden secret agents that aren't really there. We just do that naturally. So we have to have tools to overcome that. This is true for all of science, right? Is global warming, is the pattern of climate change real, or is it an artifact of some statistical effect? Well, we need to know that. And the brain automatically sees that. Oh, okay, CO2 gases are going up, the temperature is going up. That's a correlation. But as we are all taught in day 1 of statistics, correlations do not mean causations. Right. Sometimes they do, but sometimes they don't. So we have to have some techniques to tell the difference. So that's true with conspiracies.
Now, going back to people and their likelihood to attach to a conspiracy, which you covered in quite a few places in the book, what are some ways, if you take an average individual, you would be able to think or relate them to the idea that they would be more likely to believe in a conspiracy? What are some of the features we look at?
Oh, right. Well, so there, we're kind of looking at proximate causes of belief versus ultimate causes of belief. So proximate causes are like, what about education? Do more educated people, more educated people less likely to believe? Yes. Conspiracy theories, a little bit, but not a lot. It's not huge. If you have a graduate degree versus a bachelor's degree versus a high school diploma, conspiracism goes down a little bit, but not by much, because I think, in fact, it's good to be a little paranoid, as I said, right? So there's some underlying cause there. Race is not a good predictor of conspiracism overall, but it is of which conspiracy theories you're more likely to believe. African Americans in America are more likely to think that the CIA planted crack cocaine in inner cities or invented AIDS to decimate the black population in American cities and so on. Those are not true, but Tuskegee experiment was, where medications for syphilis was withheld from African American victims of having an STD when they could have been treated and cured, or at least prevent the spread. And they weren't, because of the government decided we wanted to use them as test subjects. Astonishing that this happened in the 20th century, like the middle of the 20th century. Our government did this? Yeah, right? So, of course, when the COVID-19 vaccines are rolled out, African Americans were more vaccine hesitant than white Americans. And that is the reason they gave. And it's like, okay, it's understandable, right? Things have come a long ways. We don't do that anymore, right? But still, white Americans are more likely to think that the government is conspiring to take away their guns, Second Amendment stuff. And so race is, a kind of a proxy for which ones, and then there's personality type. Some people are more suspicious and some are more gullible, more open-minded. There's kind of a balance between being so skeptical that you don't believe anything, which is not good. You should believe things that have evidence for them, and being so open-minded, your brains fall out and you think everything is real. Right? Yeah. So, the rub is, where do you draw that line? And there's no perfect algorithm to tell you. It depends on the particular claim, the evidence for it, so on.
That's true. The quality's in place. I always look at people as a singular entity when I'm thinking about concepts and understanding what they do in the bigger picture. And if there's a person who has a conspiratorial... Actually, I want to pull back to that one. What has dealing with skepticism and conspiracy brought to you? This was a question I had in mind. What has it brought more of to you than the average individual over the years? Does it bring certain kind of individuals? What comes with the category? Because I think every category comes with something.
Well, yeah, I guess historically it's been kind of a fringe element to it. The JFK assassinations, or the John Birchers, or some of the anti-Catholic conspiracy theorists, anti-Jewish, anti-Semitic conspiracy theorists, sort of going back to the middle of the 20th century. That had kind of a fringy element to it, but I think it's gone more mainstream of late, particularly since the internet, because it could reach so many more people in real time. So 9/11 Truth, I never thought this would take off, but it did. There was that internet film, homemade film, Loose Change, with a viewership of like tens of millions of people. It's astonishing how many people can be reached. The analogy I make in the book is, back in the 60s, JFK assassination conspiracy theorists had their little newsletters that they mailed out, printed on mimeograph sheets, and they meet in hotel rooms, conference rooms with a dozen people. Now you can have, 10 million people read your newsletter. And so it reaches far more people, and it mainstreams a lot of these ideas that would otherwise, I think, stay on the fringes.
So fringe. Makes sense. Oh, that actually, and also related to that, let's say the categories of like groups, QAnon or 4chan or 8chan, all these internet groups, is this like a large population, or does it just seem large? I never took part in... I always like to feel like I was with the internet when it started and I followed every category, but some categories I left alone, and I wonder how large they got. How might one describe that?
Well, I wasn't a big user of 4chan or 8chan or any of those either. And it's hard to get numbers on them because, polling data is not always accurate with self-report data. And, but if you look at like more mainstream polls, like how many Republicans versus Democrats believe that the QAnon or Pizzagate or whatever, or if you want to go higher up, rigged election, that 2020 was rigged, election was rigged. It's a significant two-digit number in the of Republicans, somewhere between a third and 2/3, depending on how the questions are asked. Think, that Biden is illegitimate, Trump is still president, he's going to be put back in the office at any moment. Not thousands or hundreds of thousands, tens of millions, right? So that's pretty big. Now, do they go on 4chan? No. Most of them are kind of getting this information from more mainstream sources, if not Fox News and one of the other ones, like what's that, One America, what's the other shoot, escapes me now the name of
I've heard
those political news that are far right leaning. And of course you have
Newsmax.
Yeah, Newsmax. Yeah. So they get that from that, or they hear a friend of a friend told them that the election was rigged, or that they hear Trump talking about this in his speeches online, and so there they get it not from the super fringy areas, but from more mainstream. But there's a trickle up effect from those fringes where it gets momentum online. And then these people hear about it. And again, I call this tribal conspiracism. This is what our tribe believes. And, I don't have the resources to check to see if the election was rigged or not. What do I know about, that precinct in Georgia where they were counting the votes, and then some truck pulled up at 2 a.m. and they unloaded some boxes in the back. Ooh, what was going on there? I don't know. How would I know? I wouldn't even know who to call. But I heard from a friend at work that it's been clearly demonstrated these were fraudulent boxes of votes that said, Trump, and then they changed them to Biden. Well, when you look into it, you find this is complete nonsense. But just hearing about it from somebody at work or whatever, then that's how it kind of filters out.
On that specific point, have you heard about that item where if 25% of a group believes something, that's when it starts to take hold? Have you looked into something like that? Where what's the point?
Tipping points. It may not even need to be that high. The tipping point can be a single digit number, but then you get this what's called a spiral of silence, or the pluralistic ignorance, where everybody thinks everybody else thinks something when almost none of them do. The classic experiment on this was with college binge drinking. If you ask students individually, they'll mostly say, no, I don't really like doing that, but everybody else does. Yeah, and every one of them privately says, no, I'm not into it, but everybody else is. And so you can get this kind of collective action when no one actually really wants to do it, right? And so I think a lot of that happens when you hear about these things, like, oh, I don't know about the rigged election, but everybody else seems to think so. Maybe it is true.
That's true. I've seen this in a few categories. There's a show where they talk to girls about their dating, and they're like, I'm really, let's say, conservative, but I have friends who do this. And they ask the next person, they're like, I'm also conservative, but I have friends who do these things. I guess nobody ends up doing the things that are not good looking in public. Same thing with the binge drinking or whatever it is. It's always somewhere else in a way.
Right.
One related item, but separate, is you talked about how if there is conspiracies, even if you add in one that was made up, that doesn't even exist, some people will join in on that. And there are some features of people that make them more likely to jump in on a conspiracy regardless, like fear was a big one. Can you speak on fear and how it connects?
Right. So there you're tapping into anxiety, lack of control, or locus of control. For example, if I tend to focus on myself being in control, I have a high internal locus of control. I think I can make things happen. And people with high internal locus of control are less likely to believe in conspiracy theories, because those low in internal locus of control, or they're high in external locus of control, things that think that things happen to them by other people, and things are out there that are out of my control, and I'm wary of that, right? And both are true to a certain extent. Again, there are real conspiracies, and just because you're paranoid doesn't mean people aren't out to get you. Sometimes they are. So, but being put in a position of feeling unstable, uncertain, anxious, out of control, conspiracism, illusory, kind of illusory patternicity happens. Like you do tend to see things that are not really there. And that kind of makes sense, if you think about it, because a lot of times people in power don't have as much power as they think they would have when they were out of power. And people out of power think that people in power have way more control than they actually do. And so a lot of conspiracism happens by people out of power. So just politically, the losing party in any election tends to think the other guy's cheated. And then at some point they give up and just work on the next election. The only thing different about Trump is he never abandoned the rigged election conspiracy. Even in 2016, he still thinks it was rigged for Hillary to get more of the popular vote than he did. He still doesn't like that, right? Normally, when the party wins, they drop the conspiracies. Like, oh, it's totally fair. We won. It's totally fair election. Right. Right. So that's unusual now. But normally, once you are in a position of control and confidence and power, then you don't need conspiracism.
Right. It's not advantageous at that point. One thing that came to mind there is, speaking of power, you had talked about things that make a conspiracy not functional, such as, or less likely to be the case, if it requires some sort of super powerful individual or a person or a large number of individuals to participate. If it requires some grandiose elements, then the likelihood of it being an actual thing is much lower. That's just a couple of the elements at play.
Yeah, here I'm making a distinction between realistic conspiracy theories that may be true, which usually involves some very specific thing. The example I use is Volkswagen cheating the emission standards of the EU for years. That's not surprising. We know corporations do things to gain an unfair advantage, get a little extra profit. And so no shocker there. Or like insider trading on Wall Street. Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a daily news story. But world domination.
World domination.
Control the entire country. Well, maybe not so much. Less likely to be true, right? And so that just like, and again, how many not only people would have to be involved, how many elements have to come together just right for the conspiracy to be pulled off? And the answer is that is not many, because the more you have, the more things have to come together just the right way. The harder it would be to pull it off, just because people screw up, things happen, chance, randomness, entropy, So if you take something like 9/11 as an inside job, well, what would it take for the Bush administration to actually hire people? You got to pay people. Where's the money come from? And it would have to be at least hundreds of workers that you'd send into those buildings, knock down through the drywall to get into where the support structures are, and wrap them in those explosive devices that people use to bring down buildings, demolition experts. And you can ask these companies we have, what does it take? And they tell you, oh my God, it's a huge job, takes weeks and months to prepare the building. We have to get in there and break all the drywall out and put the explosive devices around the beams and so on. And so it's obvious what we're doing. How would you do that to the World Trade Center buildings, two of the most secure buildings in the world, right? Because it was bombed. The basement bomb in 1993 by Al Qaeda. Oh, okay, there's a clue, right? So they're they went in there under the pretense of elevator repair. Elevator repair? What are they doing not near the elevator, right? And how would they spend weeks or months in there preparing those buildings? They're huge. And not only that, they would have to plant the explosives devices in the exact floors that the planes hit, because you can see on the videos, the buildings collapse at the place where the planes hit, and often at an angle. So you'd have to know that the explosive devices have to be planted at floors, 89, 90, 91, 92, 93, 94, 96, because that's the wing hit at that, because that's the way it collapsed, right? How would they know that ahead of time? Yeah. And finally, not one of these people has told anybody about this. Not one of them has told a friend of a friend or a girlfriend or a spouse or a workmate, hey, I was in on it. I was there. Or I know somebody, my brother, my fellow workmate. He joined the group and he was there. You saw what happened with the January 6th insurrection. People posted on social media, here I am, with a selfie. And the FBI tracked him down. There they are. Boom, boom, boom. Got him right and left. Right. Not one person has been indicted or accused or even spoken up about 9/11 at all. Not one. That tells us it's not an inside job. Impossible.
There's something about when there's too many missing pieces, and it would take so much for it to occur that maybe this is outlandish in a way. It's like when someone comes up with a scenario for why a relationship didn't work because this, but actually just it wasn't a fit or they left or something.
Right.
It's more simple.
Right.
And also you shouldn't attribute, I don't know if this is exactly related, but to malice, I guess, or planning something that is more likely to be...
Oh, yes, the conspiracy principle, never attribute to malice what could be explained by randomness or chance or incompetence.
Right.
People are very incompetent. I remember for my first book, Why People Believe Weird Things, I was on a book tour. I went on G. Gordon Liddy's radio talk show, right? He asked me about, conspiracies. I said, well, you know more about it than I do. You're Mr. Watergate. And he goes, yeah, people are incompetent, can't keep their mouth shut. It's hard to get even a couple people to coordinate and do something. Right. And, that's why I have that whole chapter on the First World War, which was triggered by a conspiracy to assassinate Franz Ferdinand, who was the heir apparent to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, which is a threat to Serbia. So the Serbian nationalists assassinated him. But it was quite a complex plot. By complex, I mean relatively simple compared to 9/11 as an inside job. But, you just have 7 guys and they have to meet. You got to go to these particular house and give this code word. Then they give you the gun or the hand grenade. And, half of them weren't even able to do that. Then somebody else went to the wrong place, not on the parade route. And a couple of guys were on the parade route. And one of them, takes his hand grenade and hits it against the thing to ignite it and then you got like 10 seconds. But one of the hand grenades didn't ignite, and another gun jammed, and only one of them worked. The hand grenade went off, but it bounced off the trunk of the car and rolled under the car behind them, so it blew up the wrong car, and the whole thing was just a complete mess. And the only reason it happened at all is by pure chance that, after Franz Ferdinand was attacked, he went to, give his speech and complained about the reception he got, which is not good. And then he goes, let's go back to the hospital, check on our comrades who were injured in that first explosion. So they go back on the same parade route where they just by chance happened to run into the one guy left who was kind of sitting there on the curb like, oh, this was a wasted day. And here comes the car. He's like, oh my God, there he is. Bam. Bam. That's how things normally go.
I've thought about this for many scenarios. If it takes so much effort, they're not light. Most of these scenarios are, the average person, let's say, it's like, oh, I have to go to the gym. A lot of effort, right? It's like 4,000 pieces for some of these huge items. And then the idea that it just happens and it's just negative energy. It's so calculated. There's so much effort in these logic, management, planning. Oh, this person will be there. Okay, we'll do this. We'll go there. There's some intelligence in that to any sort of high level, let's say, conspiracy or effort. It's not simple. You cannot do it. I've thought about that.
Think about the fake moon landing. What would it take to fake a moon landing?
You talk about that word.
I mean, it's just a comic routine that has been done comedically where, people are going to ask us how we got to the moon. Well, so we got to build this huge rocket so they can see, well, that's how we got to the moon, that huge rocket. Well, that's going to be pretty expensive. And you got to pay all these actors and feed them every day. And, where are we going to have this set that we're going to film this thing? The end of this comedic routine is, wouldn't it be cheaper to just go to the moon and film it there?
We'll just get there.
Yeah, right. So, and again, not one person has ever come through and said, I was the cameraman on the fake moon landing shoot. People would absolutely do that. People are blabbermouths. They can't keep their mouth shut. They want to tell other people about it. They want to write the tell-all book, put it in their memoirs, go on 60 Minutes and go, oh, I got a story for you. And here's my 3 sources to confirm it. And then next thing you know, the guy's blabbing away to Congress and we hear about it. But that has not the fact that doesn't happen for these like the fake moon landing, 9/11, so on. It's not true.
I have a challenge question here for variety. Let's say you were a person and you wanted to get a conspiracy somehow developed, at least with your friend group or a larger group or such. What are some things you would do? Would you attach to people's thoughts already? Would you start from scratch? What are some things you would do if you wanted to actually start one from scratch?
Start a conspiracy theory? Fake your own conspiracy theory? People have done that. Well, we know that, someone like Alex Jones, he just makes stuff up on the fly in real time and people just believe it. You can see the elements to it. Yeah, if you're going to make one up, well, of course, it's got to be grand. Can't be, we're going to have this big plot so we can make a 1% more profit in our company. That's boring.
We're making 1%.
Right. No, it's got to be something, to get people behind. We're going to like the January 6th insurrectionists, like, oh my God, this is our 1776 moment. That's one of them said. We're going in. It's going to be huge. Got to get down there. And we're going to march. We're going to be strong. They're stealing our country from us right underneath our noses. We're not going to put up with this. And the Second Amendment people showed up, the Proud Boys with their guns and a body armor and those wrist ties, the plastic ties. I mean, a lot of them were serious about this, and they were excited. I mean, again, we're going to make the country 1% better than it was. We want to make it great again in a big way, right? And we're going to go down there and stop the steal. That's the kind of conspiracy theory that ignites people, gets them motivated. Right? You've seen those videos that of Steve Bannon on that podcast the day before. On January 5th, he was on somebody's podcast, and you can see the videos of it on YouTube. He's going, "Oh, this is going to be huge. Tomorrow's going to be it's going to be rocking. I mean, you got to be there." And you can see people just, "Oh my God, I want to get down there. This is it." It's like I feel like I'm Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and Hamilton, and we're going to start a new country. It's going to be giant. That's what ignites people.
You have to be like, you're one of the heroes, and you're saving, and you're causing the big change. Yeah. Maybe it makes you feel bigger. Maybe it would match more likely to a person who has some feeling of being smaller, that this would make them feel larger and more relevant.
Most of us feel small because we are. Most of us can't really do much of anything except in our personal lives and lives of our family, and maybe influence our fellow workmates at work. And I mean, that's about it, right? Unless you run for office, or you're the police captain, or some politician in a position of power, you're the CEO of a major corporation. Those people, they have real power. Most of us, we're just regular folks, right? So a conspiracy theory is kind of invigorating, like, ooh, I have some inside knowledge. This is really cool. Secret information. That's always appealed to people, that there's secret information, secret knowledge. The knowledge of the gods or the mystics, or anybody that's seemingly has power, and now I get to participate in that. That feels good. It's not just entertaining, although it is that. It also makes you feel like you're in the club now. Whereas most of the time, most of us aren't, right?
Left out in a way.
Yeah,
that's true. Some in like an intellectual way. Some as not part of their old, let's say, friend groups, in different ways. Yeah, you can be left out in some form. Now, one thing that comes to mind is that when people make large statements, well, that's one category. And then sometimes when people are saying things, they are held back in current time. They are censored in some way from presenting their viewpoints, or term canceled in recent time is popular. And you mentioned in your book about how that does not match clearly with allowing truth to show. Can you speak on canceling and or censorious nature, and how it is not advantageous to a society?
Well, a free society, particularly a democracy. One reason that the First Amendment is first is because it's foundational, right? Free speech. Now, of course, this doesn't speak to whether Twitter should ban people or not. It's a private company, publicly traded, but it's not a government agency. So the First Amendment just applies to the government, can't silence you. But the reason for that, and the reason it's probably better if Twitter and these social media companies don't ban people, or at least keep it to a minimum, is because this is the right that gives rise to all the other rights. That is, if you can't freely speak your mind, think the thoughts you want, and speak the thoughts that you're thinking, then we're doomed, right? Because who knows what the truth is? I don't know everything. I'm not omniscient, neither are you. And so how are we going to get there? Well, we got to talk to each other, right? We got to communicate. We got to spitball ideas and then test them. It's the Constitution of Knowledge, as Jonathan Rauch calls it in his great book. That science and journalism, fact checking, peer review, this kind of this sort of disputation and debate between great minds. This is how we arrive at the truth. And so the moment you start censoring people, because that's the bad idea. Well, who decided that? You? You got the moral, we're in the middle of this news story about these protests in Iran over the moral police killed this woman because she didn't wear a hijab right. Moral police? What? We would never do that in America. Well, actually, we do that in America, right? Social media is always cancel culture. That's what it is. It's the moral police. You're not woke enough, right? So we've been picking on the right here. Let me pick on the left a little bit, right? I'm not very woke. I'm a baby boomer. I'm kind of traditionally old school liberal in most of my social attitudes. And, but some of this far left progressive wokeness, it just seems insane to me. And then particularly the cancellation of people that use the wrong pronouns or you use the wrong adjective or you misspoke. I got that one tweet. I know you've tweeted 10,000 times, but I found one. That's the one. You're out. Right? It's like, okay, that's worse than what the right does. The right used to be into the, we're worried about rock lyrics, or Madonna's music videos, now it's the left doing the same. Left used to defend rockers and Madonna and, that kind of thing. Now it's gone it's kind of flipped, which is weird.
You mentioned that actually in the book that you came up with 3 groupings at the end. One was smaller of types of conspiracies. One was woke, one was paranoid, and one was realistic, I believe. Can you tell us about those correlates?
I'm just trying to come up with a classificatory system by which we can evaluate conspiracy theories to decide if they're true or not. So, again, the kind of more paranoid ones, the alien lizard people are running the world. Okay, this is so out there. It's unlikely to be true. But more realistic ones.
When I saw that one, I thought is that Mark Zuckerberg people when they see him, they call him like a lizard?
Right.
Okay.
Right, yes. He actually does sort of look like an AI, right? He's probably on the spectrum. I'm sure he is, like Elon. Elon says he's on the spectrum. Okay. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. It used to be considered a bad thing. Now it's called cognitive diversity. That's good. Right? Anyway, but that's not what this is about. This is about the aliens have actually visited. They're here and they're running the show. Okay, that's pretty ridiculous. That's one extreme. The other end, more realistic conspiracy theories. Well, okay, so JFK, I'm a lone assassin guy, right? I think there's no evidence for anybody else being involved besides Lee Harvey Oswald, but I can see why people believe it for a couple of reasons. One, political assassinations do happen. They have happened. I had a database in there, or cited a database from Michael. I forget his last name now. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Political scientists who collected, what percentage of monarchs throughout European history have been assassinated. It was something like 15-20% have been killed. In other words, the transfer of power was done through violence. It was a coup. Somebody was assassinated or overthrown violently. So it's not completely crazy to think that happens. Lincoln was assassinated by a conspiracy. But we found out about it pretty quickly. Within hours, we knew who did it. The people at the time. It was, it was half a dozen people involved and so on. They were supposed to assassinate the vice president and the secretary of state, secretary of war, and so on, decapitate the entire Lincoln administration. And they all failed except the one, Booth managed to kill Lincoln. But so it's not completely crazy to think, well, maybe somebody did that to Kennedy, right? There's kind of a logic to it in historical context. So, but always you have to look at the specific case. Well, where's the evidence for the second shooter? Who is it? I had Oliver Stone on my show, and he thinks the CIA did it. Well, that's a pretty big organization, and we do know that they've been up to no good, and they've assassinated foreign leaders. Who in the CIA did it? Well, Alan Dulles was somehow involved. He was the head of the CIA. Well, really? I mean, what evidence do you have for this? He should have been indicted. Bring him before a grand jury. Come on. Well, there was never any evidence. Right. Okay. So again, we have to look at each case specifically.
That's true. Some items, it's like, where was the police report for this conflict? Or why was nobody... No, we didn't do it that day, but it still occurred. Normally in the circumstance, you would have somebody reach out to someone or later talk about it. Like you said, people like to blabber about what occurred. Right.
Evidence does emerge. Sometimes it takes a while. I mean, the church committee in the late 70s related to the Kennedy assassination conspiracy theories did uncover a lot of weird things that the CIA had been up to. And in the 90s, there was another kind of revelation of secrets about MK Ultra, for example, and some other stuff the CIA was up to. WikiLeaks, just think about that. The stuff even during the Obama administration, President transparency. Not so much. Spying on our own citizens, not just metadata about phone calls, but actual, reading emails, listening to phone calls without, warrantless searches. Right? They didn't have to get a warrant from a judge. There's a reason for that. Because agencies like that will abuse their power if they can. They have a good reason. Oh, terrorism. We got to catch the terrorists. And okay, that's a signal detection problem. If you lower your criteria for who you're going to think could be a terrorist, you're going to get more terrorists, but you're also going to get more innocent people. Right? So that's why we have those laws and protections of individual citizens' rights to privacy. And WikiLeaks showed us that, not so much by our own government in the 21st century, right? If it wasn't for Edward Snowden, we wouldn't know this. So I consider him something of a hero to democracy. Whether the specifics, I don't know that much about a lot of it's classified. What was he leaked that could have been damaging? We know some that was bad. So maybe there's a debate to be had there. But my point is that without Edward Snowden or the Pentagon Papers going back with Ellsberg, we wouldn't know what that Johnson, not just Nixon, but Johnson, Kennedy, covering things up about Vietnam, lying to the public, lying to Congress about what was really going on in Vietnam. Wow. Gulf of Tonkin, false flag operation, right? We want to escalate the war. We're going to concoct this kind of maybe semi thing that happened to one of our ships, but we'll blow it up and say they attacked us. Right? It's like that line, that I came, I saw, I conquered. In the 21st century, it's I came, I saw, and I was just standing there minding my own business. And he attacked me, so we had to invade. This is like Putin.
Right.
Oh, we had to invade Ukraine because of the Nazis. What Nazis? Where? That guy over there. Oh, okay.
That's true. One thing also is if that from one side it's we are doing things for safety or preparedness, and then from the other side when there's a vagueness to it, where something like social media, they say we removed you because of community guidelines, but you don't know what it's about. If you bring these two together, it's almost like it covers all the elements where whenever we feel like it, this can be done because for everybody. So it takes away any sort of rights in some way from individuals of some form. Also related to that, the thing you just mentioned, I like that concept where when there is something that happens awry, or some random paper gets out, or some words get out that wouldn't have happened, some of those are the most informative pieces we ever have in history. One time I had a client, which I didn't know until a random message came to me. Oh, this was the rate that they were actually charging at. I would have known unless they came through, not through the company, but through me. So without that, I would never have known. That's a small example, but we have a lot of examples over time where these papers got out, or in some anger there was a fight, and these people said these things. Can that be very informative?
Right. So transparency is really a key to attenuating conspiracism. When people can see what's really going on, they're less likely to become suspicious and paranoid. Just at work, companies that are very transparent, who gets raises and why, what you got to do to get the raise, the promotion. And when it's clear, this is what everybody makes, so there's no secrets. When that doesn't happen, people get very paranoid. How come that guy get the promotion I didn't, and so on. And certainly that's true. That's one reason why in government agencies, you can see exactly what the different tiers are and what they make and how to get there and what classes you have to take or training you have to get to move up and so on. That's to prevent that kind of paranoia. By the way, on social media, so that's an interesting example. Community guidelines. You violated a community guidelines. And they're so vague, and it's never clear. People post this on social media. I got kicked off, and I just got this generic line. And I suspect it's because I'm a conservative. Maybe, but maybe not. Who knows? But this is the problem with these social media companies. We can kick you off for any reason, and we're not going to tell you. And that's, of course, this is going to make people paranoid. You're doing this because you hate conservatives. You're a bunch of libtards running Twitter, right? So here we are with, Elon's maybe going to buy it and change everything. Maybe. maybe a lot of it was just random. The algorithm screwed up because you used a certain word in your tweet and that got flagged, even though you don't believe that. You believe the opposite of that and you're calling attention to it. This has happened. But again, that lack of transparency. I mean, if Elon buys Twitter and makes it transparent, here is the algorithm. Here's how it works. We're going to publicly show everybody. That would help. That would attenuate conspiracism about social media.
That's a true point. I want to do this part here that I thought about where there's so many topics I want to cover, but I will leave those to there. People. I want to focus on some certain people because in the end of the book, you mention quite a few individuals, some of which I've talked with, some not. But I want to check what you think about what they're currently doing or what happened to them, because a lot of them have gotten, like, we could call it like kind of punched, if you will, for their activity, and what comes to mind or what you have learned from them, kind of like a speed round, I don't know what to call it, but of each person. So one is Peter Boghossian. He's very active right now. He will go on college campuses and ask and bring a logical demeanor to students. What comes to mind in relation to him?
Pete's great. He's a longtime good friend. He's a good guy. He has a lot of integrity. He really wants to make a difference. He wants to do the right thing. He's a standard kind of old school liberal who is concerned about the shift toward the far left and progressive wokeness and how censorious that is in kind of destroying liberty and free speech of thought, freedom of thought. So I like his program. I mean, it's not something I would do. He does it well. The kind of street epistemology, as he calls it, that kind of Socratic method. It's a real skill I don't have, just questioning people to kind of draw them into, what the real debate is about, and what would it take for you to step from here to here, change your mind. I love how he does that, and so yeah, he's great. I like Pete. And by the way, the so-called squared hoax that he and his teammates did on that of concocting these fake journal articles that were published. People don't like that. They get mad about it, and it doesn't prove anything. Well, it does. I mean, the fact that even if whether it get published in what kind of journal it was, just that if you read a paragraph from a real journal article and the fake journal article, and you can't tell the difference, there's something wrong there. It's like, okay, obscurantism of the language has gotten so bad that if an average intelligent reader has no idea what the hell you're talking about, then maybe we need to clarify things in that field a little more.
It says something. It's kind of like in your book when conspiracy was made up and still a percentage of people believed it. Yes, it says something about
the Dakota crash.
Right.
The magnetic effects of the vaccine. What magnetic effects? You just make these things up and people tick the box. It's not clear why they tick the box. Maybe they're in the mode of, I suspect everybody, this one, and they just don't even really think about it.
Nicholas Christakis, I once spoke with him. It was very friendly. I remember some people was very friendly, super friendly. And then he also had a popular item when he was with the students and they surrounded him, and that was very shared on the internet. Your thoughts on him and his ability to stand in logic and informational nature?
Oh, I like his work on social networks, of course, before I even met him and before that incident happened at Yale, because he really showed to what extent, environment of other people you're around. People who smoke tend to be with other smokers. People who have weight problems tend to be around other people that have weight problems. So, change your social environment. What a difference that makes. That was eye-opener. But the Yale thing, I've seen him on Joe Rogan's podcast. He didn't want to talk about it that much. I could tell he was uncomfortable, and in part because he was sympathetic to the students. He's a liberal, and this is kind of a liberal cause, and so you want to be sympathetic, but he could see this was going too far. So I could see he was in that kind of conflicting area there. To me, it was an eye-opener. I mean, that was kind of the pinnacle of that kind of woke progressive censoriousness on campus, to just taken to the extreme, just so ridiculous. This is our home. No, it's not. It's not your home. It's a college campus. You're supposed to hear ideas you don't want to hear. This is the whole point of being here, right? You're supposed to protect us from bad ideas. No. That's not his job. His job is to do the opposite of that, right? Okay. So, and the whole thing was on this ridiculous, Halloween costumes. Which are the acceptable ones? Which are not? You have to tell us. No, we're not going to tell you that. You're adults. Grow up. So that I thought was just a game changer, just to alert average people who were unaware of what's going on in college campuses. That's how far it's gotten at Yale, one of the biggest institutes in the country. So, and then finally his new book on the Blueprint book. I thought this was great, just to show that really, I love the section on accidental societies that are set up, these shipwrecks, where people survive. They have to kind of form a little group, and the ones that are more vertical don't do so well as the ones that are more horizontal, that is more cooperative and so on. People that stick with kind of more vertical military type social structure don't do as well. I thought that was an eye-opener.
Maybe bureaucracy comes up in there.
Yes, it's a problem, yeah.
Now, Nichola Raihani, I found her to be very intelligent when we spoke. She did research on cleaner fish. You have mentioned her. Anything that comes to mind about her book, The Social Instinct, which just came out in paper book also?
Oh, right, yes. Right, well...
cooperation. Does cooperation play into conspiracy at all also?
Well, I think so, in the sense that, again, it's one of my three. So there's proxy conspiracism, constructive conspiracism, and tribal. I think it's the tribal conspiracism. I want to be considered a reliable tribal member. I'm a good Republican or Democrat. I'm a good Christian or Jew or Muslim or whatever. I want to signal to my fellow group members that I have virtue. So this is virtue signaling under the rubric of costly signaling theory. The crazier the idea that I endorse, the more I signal to my fellow group members, I am really one of you. Like, I'm willing to publicly say I think QAnon is true. This would be an example. You can't possibly believe it. Well, okay. But everybody else in my group believes it, so I'm going to signal to them that I'm one of the group. And I'm so loyal, I'm willing to publicly state I believe this insane idea, right? So I think the social cooperation, social instinct, it makes it hard. It's hard to stand out in your group. You want to be accepted. I don't want to be a weirdo. I don't want to be the one that stands out.
That's true. It's like you're showing I will take a hit or take a risk. It's like the person going over the hill and taking some arrows from the attackers.
Right.
I'm willing to do that kind of. I'll throw two other individuals. Richard Dawkins, because he was always one of my favorites, The Selfish Gene. Do you think about The Selfish Gene at all today? And I believe maybe you have spoken with Dawkins. What do you think of Richard Dawkins?
Oh, I've known Richard since the early 90s, since we started the Skeptics in 92. He was one of our early speakers. For one of his books, he always toured the United States for his books, and I love him. He's great. He's brilliant. He's a deep thinker. He's not shrill and militant, as, theists call him. He's a militant atheist. He's shrill. No, he's not. I mean, just the opposite of that. If anything, he's kind of shy, and he has to kind of push himself to get out there and be more of a public intellectual in debating things, because that's not his style. I know him personally pretty well, and he's a really nice guy. Again, this kind of public image he has because of the God Delusion book that kind of really put him out on the public map, more even so than The Selfish Gene. But he's not. He's thoughtful. I was at a conference once where he was being honored, and but I just noticed that these kind of small groups where we'd break up and discuss different things, and he would sit there and quietly listen while everybody. These are all like super smart, successful people, and so the idea would be kind of ricocheting around the room, and then like half an hour into it, he would say something, give his thoughts. And all of a sudden, the entire conversation shifted. Oh, as Richard would say, Richard makes a good point. Richard pointed out that, oh, wow, okay. So he's at another level, even amongst, the best, smartest people you can think of, right? And, of course, the Selfish Gene still is cited and in print and so on, huge, because it's an important book. Even, this is a good example of how to write a good science book. It's for professional scientists and the general reader. You'll see both. You'll see people on in an airplane reading The Selfish Gene, and you'll see professional scientists citing it in their professional papers.
I've thought about that once with a lyricist. If you have high-level lyrics and also a base-level lyrics for the average person, that's the best you can possibly do, because you reach both.
Nice analogy, yeah.
I've thought about that in detail. If you're at the bottom, you can reach a lot of people, but there's a chunk that will never listen to your music. Richard Dawkins is wonderful. Now, actually, you mentioned college. Before I go to the next person, college campuses right now, what do you think of them? Would you want to be on a college campus? It's not the same as it was, let's say, 15 years ago. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, well, I am on a college campus.
Right.
And for the most part, you don't see the craziness. If you just watch Fox News and the little segments they show of campus craziness, you'd think every campus is, boiling over and in protests every day. No, most of the time students are just doing their thing. But the number of incidents of those kind has increased. Maybe there was a spike in the late 60s, say 68. with all the protests over the Vietnam War and then Watergate in 71, 72 and all that stuff. It was pretty volatile then. I'd say it was quiescent after that, and then it spiked again with George Floyd and the Me Too movement, the BLM movement, and so on. And now the kind of wokeness has gotten there, and it is pervasive. And even if so, one point I make is that, well, you go to campus, it's pretty quiet, you don't see much, but it doesn't take much to get everybody to kind of shift over out of fear of being, first of all, pluralistic ignorance, the spiral of silence. Second of all, fear of being outed and canceled yourself. So there's kind of a preemptive denunciation. I'll denounce somebody before they denounce me, right? Even if nobody really believes any of this stuff. So that is pervasive. Also, administrators are, I don't know what their motive is. They're scared. They want to protect themselves legally. So, we all have to take these online training programs about race and sex and so on, sensitivity, and, what kind of jokes can be told. None. Don't tell any jokes ever again.
No jokes ever.
Never jokes ever. And the scenarios are just so dumb, right? So, you're in a meeting and so you overhear somebody tell an off-color joke about race or sex or whatever, and you should A, repeat the joke, B, intervene and tell them why it was wrong, or C, report it to human resources. The answer is always C. Turn them in, right? So enough of that goes on. People self-censor. So I worry about it that way, the self-censorship, because college campuses used to be the opposite of that. People just speak their minds. Now you're being canceled by your own fellow liberals. Not good.
You just remind me of something I wrote as far as self-censorship and how it may kill. Something I wrote down. Canceling a topic or person kills the thing in the moment, but not the reality of it ready to spring back up. Also cutting off the wings of a bird to keep it in a cage. It's no longer a bird, basically. Does that kill some things?
Nicely put. Yes. Yeah, that's the problem.
It ends a category.
Yeah.
But it's still there underneath.
Right. Right. So, and it makes academia less trustworthy, because outsiders look at that and go, these people are so insane about this gender thing or whatever it is. Why should I believe them about climate change or vaccines? There's just a bunch of nonsense going on over there. That's the problem. Loss of trust in institutions that used to be trustworthy. I mean, teachers were always highly respected. Police always respected. The CDC, government agencies like that, always highly respected in polls. Not anymore. I mean, Congress now is like the lowest. The trustworthiness in Congress is like the lowest it's ever been, right? The public just doesn't trust Congress. Wow. This is the people that are running the country.
Right.
Not good.
It's hefty. I felt hefty there for a second because it weighs on when I think about that. Things are limited. I don't like to see limitation. I like abundance and opportunity. So when I see things like being limited or self-censorship like you were talking about, it is not in my category.
Right.
I like more entropy and variety and whatnot. The channel, by the way, for the people, used to be called Armen Entropy.
Oh.
Combine that there.
Nice.
I'll throw in, because you spoke with, I have to throw in Jordan Peterson. He is super popular. His empathic sense or feeling-oriented nature, I think, has related with a lot of individuals. He's spoken for certain groups well. What are your thoughts on Jordan and his personality?
I like Jordan. I know him a little bit. I would say he's a good friend, but I know him. And I like him. I think he's, for the most part, doing good work. I think his intentions are good. He wants to help people. And he is. So what's wrong with that? Well, because he speaks his mind on things that are controversial, and that's not so acceptable anymore, which is what we were just talking about. So I think he goes too far in the kind of mythology stuff. I think sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, doesn't really represent what he thinks it does. Maybe.
Well, it's difficult.
Nicely put.
I tried.
Yes. I could not get through Maps of Meaning. I tried. I lasted like 7-8 hours on the audio version, but it's like 30 hours long. So I DNF'd after a while, and because I just couldn't understand the language. Maybe I'm just not steeped in mythology. I mean, I went through my Joseph Campbell stage in the 80s and read all that stuff, The Hero with a Thousand Faces and comparative mythology. I loved all that stuff, but it's not really the way I think about the world. I'm much more empirical and rational. And, things that are mythically true or psychologically true, I don't know what that means. I mean, I do know what they mean by it, but to me, I just want to know if it's really true. Right. So for me, the resurrection of Jesus either happened or it didn't. And I don't think it did, because of the evidence. It's an extraordinary claim. The evidence is far from extraordinary. But if somebody says, yeah, but it's mythically true for me, it's like, okay, whatever it takes to get you through the night, life is hard. Okay. But I want to know if it's really true. Was he really dead for 3 days and then he was really brought back to life? Really? And if not, then what's the point of being a Christian, right? You might as well be a Jew or nothing. But for somebody like Jordan, I think it's like, it's okay to believe if it makes a pragmatic difference in your life. Okay, I can see that for some people, not for me, but so I think he has an effect that way. And I do think the loss of structure for a lot of young people, goals, kind of moral grounding and some kind of commandments of some sort or another, doesn't have to be religious, but that kind of moral relativism that has spread and his pushback against that, I think is good. Because I'm a moral realist myself, even though not through religion. I think we can derive these things through reason. And he's not clear that he's religious, although he seems to cozy up to a lot of religious people, and they seem to think of him as one of their own. So maybe he is at some practical level. I don't know, but for the most part, I think what he does is good, and I like him.
Mm-hmm. He brings that feeling-related element to it.
He's a smart guy. He really is. He's a deep thinker. I think his definition of truth is far from my own. I think he's wrong, but that's okay. I mean, what do I know? I'm not omniscient either, right? So, I think he brings a different voice at the table, and that's good.
I would think there's a great humbleness to any person in the science realm. You can tell. There's just there's large things. What do we know? We're figuring it out. It's like a calmness. It's not like
I've been to a couple of his events, and he was well received. And it was not it was a bunch of proud boys there. Not at all. I mean, it was a lot of women, a diverse range of ages, and I don't know. I just thought it was fun. I mean, I've a longtime friend of Deepak Chopra. I remember going to see him and Eckhart Tolle, Leonard Mlodinow, the physicist, and I went to this because he's friends with Deepak too, and it was quite a happening. It was at the Shrine Auditorium in L.A. It was like 3,000 people filled this auditorium, and Deepak and Eckhart Tolle just kind of walked on stage in their jeans, t-shirt, and socks. They didn't even have shoes on. It couldn't be more casual. And again, these were not like fringe poor people or just whack job. No, I mean the parking lot was full of like Teslas and Lexuses and Mercedes, and these are well-to-do Hollywood people there. Why were they there? Because they're giving some kind of message, not religion, kind of spiritual, awe and wonder, meditation, the power of living in the now, kind of trying to put behind you all the dark, bad things that have happened and deal with them and move forward and get your life in order. And a lot of people need that, and they don't get it. So I think Deepak, like Jordan, wants to help people. And he, again, a lot of his techniques are not mine. I just wouldn't do this or that, but that's okay. A lot of people get value out of that.
There's a functional sense to it.
Yes, that's right. Functional sense. Yeah.
Well, this one I want to combine two people in a way because similar category and thoughts on consciousness too. Donald Hoffman, who I spoke with, and Matthew Cobb, the idea of the brain. They're both in the category of consciousness and thoughts. What are your thoughts on either them or consciousness, or also our ability to have free will, if you will?
Yeah. My thoughts on thoughts, right? I had both those guys on my podcast. Hoffman, I think, goes too far with his interface theory of truth. I was critical of that in the same way I am of Jordan's theory of truth. I do think there is objective reality. I think we can get to it. Not perfectly, of course, but, again, and I'm sure there's species-specific truths. The bat sees this differently than the way I see it. It's probably a different image on his visual cortex than mine, whatever cortex they have for echolocation. But there really is something right there. That microphone is real. It's physical. I won't tap it and blow your listeners' ears out, but it's real. And so regardless of what it looks like on my cortex, in any case, it's just neurons firing. It doesn't look like anything on my cortex. You open back of my skull and you see my visual cortex. You don't see a microphone there. So, but we can get to it through the techniques of rationality and reason, science, and so on through this kind of collective enterprise is we want to know what reality is, and we're getting better at that. It'll never be true with a capital T, but we can approach the truth with the small t toward an asymptotic curve. We're getting closer and closer. And so I think Donald goes too far on his, it's all this kind of just species specific, artifacts of the brain, and that we don't know what the reality is. Most philosophers agree with me, not him. Surveys based on, what correspondence theory of truth and objective reality and so on. As for free will, well, I'm a compatibilist like Dan Dennett. I think his arguments are pretty sound. I'm not a determinist. I think we make our own volitional choices at a higher level. You're not going to find free will at the molecular level. Well, it's just neurons swapping chemicals. Yeah, that's a physical system. Laws of nature follow that and so forth. But that's not where the volition happens. It happens that it's an emergent property of molecules swapping across synaptic gaps. You are aware of your own, things that are influencing you. You are part of the causal net, but you're also changing the causal net as you go forward in time. So here you have to accept that the universe is not predetermined. Now, a hardcore determinist would say it was all set out at the Big Bang. You and I would be having this conversation was determined 13.78 billion years ago.
I was going to move my hand like this.
Right, just like that. Yeah, I don't accept that. I think that's very, very unlikely. So I accept free will in the compatibilist sense, that we have a kind of volition, what Dan Dennett calls the kind of free will worth having, kind of volition worth having. That is the kind where I can make my decisions and I can be held accountable for my decisions and my choices. Again, degrees of freedom. I mean, the alcoholic or the drug addict has fewer degrees of freedom than I do because I don't have that problem. And for whatever reason, genes, environment, whatever, he has fewer degrees of freedom. Okay, but we already take account of that, right, in the law. To what extent were you aware of right and wrong, the McNaughton law rule? And to what extent could you control your behavior? So crimes of passion. I just lost my mind. I can't believe I did this. Okay, maybe we call it, second degree murder rather than first degree murder. You're still going to jail, but maybe not for so long. Yeah. Anyway, that's my thoughts on that.
Makes sense. That's true. The law does give weight to some elements of that. It has to take into account because we have to think about how our thinking is. Now, separate from category of people, a section on places, I wanted to say, in general, when you think of places you have resided in or been in, what are some key locations that you have been great for intellectual activity or that meant a lot to you? What locations come to mind?
You mean geographic locations?
Geographic, or could be institutions or locations, cities. Are there any things that come to mind as places that this was important for this activity?
Interesting. Yeah, no one's asked me that before. That's a good question. Well, I mean, we had our lecture series at Caltech, which was really stimulating. It's such a great place to be at. So many great minds there. And so people willing to come there because they wanted to speak at Caltech and be part of that intellectual community. That was important, I think. But probably more importantly is, to me, it doesn't really matter where you are, as long as you're with people that are interested in these topics. If you have books and other people and internet access today, I guess, you can access this anywhere. I feel lucky that I live in the world we do. And I'm old enough to remember when none of this was around, right? No internet, right? So I just had my books and had to go to a library. Remember that? What is that? It's this big building with books in it. Oh, I haven't been one of those in ages. You don't really need to. Well, anyway, I still like libraries and bookstores. I still go to bookstores. As locations, yeah, actually, let me throw that in. Independent bookstores are really fun to go to and just walk around, particularly ones that like Powell's bookstore in Portland has used books. I really like that. Because a lot of times, like the Amazon feature, if you bought this book, you might be interested in these other books. I often buy books based on that. It's like, oh, I didn't know about that book. How did I miss that? I'm going to buy that. And same thing in used bookstores. I walk around and I just pull it right off the shelf. Whoa, what is this? How did I miss this in my literature search? Okay. And yeah.
That's funny because that is true for Amazon and then that's true for used bookstore. But the Amazon bookstore in person was not that because they just did the most popular books. So there was no random finding of interesting books. They wouldn't have them there. So it's kind of funny. The combination kind of ended that part.
Right.
This one, I was going to throw it at the beginning, but I thought I'd throw it at the end. Are there any key figures from your family figures that like you have a similar quality to one or the other that has been a big part of everything you have done?
Oh, interesting. Another good question. Yeah, I guess, well, I had 4 parents. My parents were divorced when I was young and each remarried and had kids. So I have kind of typical American blended family. My parents were not educated. My pursuit of a scholarly academic life is not something I got from my parents, other than they're kind of instilling in me a sense of hard work and personal responsibility, that kind of thing. And just being good parents. I mean, there's not much you could do. You've already given your kids your genes, give them a nourishing environment, but you can't force them to become anything. I don't think that's a good idea. So, people just have to take their own life paths. For me, I also have mentors in college. When I went to college, I had no idea what I was doing. And just by pure chance, just happened to run into a couple professors at Glendale College, community college, where I was getting my GE courses out of the way for free. It was free back in the 70s.
What?
I know. Even Pepperdine that I went for my bachelor's, it was like $800 for a course or something. It was maybe not even that. I mean, it was cheap compared to now. Just maybe half a dozen professors in my life that made a huge difference. And that's pretty random. I mean, you could do word of mouth, but maybe you tick the box. Well, that class is closed. I'll take this one. Whoa, lucky me. That was a great professor. And then, just running into books that I didn't know about and read them is like the author is now a mentor, right? And it's a great thinker. And then, now at this point, just having colleagues, people like Richard Dawkins, you mentioned, Steven Pinker is a good friend. People like that also are enriching and still shape my thinking. I rewrite my lectures every semester. I don't rewrite them, but I update them and stuff, because to me the whole point of doing this is to keep intellectually active, and keep changing things as new information comes in.
I highly value that. Connecting with intellectuals and adjusting over time so you stay sharp is a big deal to me.
Yeah. My
last thing I will throw at you here is, what is one item you would want people to take away from your book, Conspiracy? One, obviously there's many. Great notes, by the way. I want to showcase. Wonderful.
Oh, you sure did. Wow.
It's worth taking. Impressive. It's worth taking wonderful notes. You get so much out of it. You lose a lot by not taking notes, I think.
Oh, yeah. I do that with books. I take notes. Yeah, it's good. Right.
What can the average individual take away from Conspiracy? Why the Rational Believe the Irrational? One message or two that you would want them to take throughout their day, if there's such a thing.
That's a great question. I guess it would be that conspiracies are real. But a lot of the conspiracy theories about them are not true. So you really have to look at them carefully and reason about them, decide which ones are true and which ones are not. And for the most part, it's better to be skeptical, because enough ideas are false, that it pays to be cautious, not to be susceptible to false ideas, like the rig election. Just be careful.
Makes sense. Dr. Shermer, I would like to thank you very much for having been on this episode. This meant a lot to me. It's nice to connect with those who I see as pinnacle figures, who I have thought of you in this category for many years, and describing a bit about your book and other individuals. Very glad to have you on.
Well, thanks for coming all the way up here to Santa Barbara. I really appreciate it. I know how terrible it is to be here next to the beach, but
this is the worst. I cannot deal with this. This is ridiculous, but you have to pay the price sometimes in life.
That's right.
I have to bite the bullet. The difficulty is going to show up, but there was a good thing on the other side. There was a fruit on the tree.
All right.
Wonderful.